Salam sejahtera to Madam and fellow classmates. My name is Alex Nang Felix Sitom. Today, I will be presenting our group assignment entitled Examine the essential element required to form a valid contract under Malaysian law and to what extent this element ensure certainty and enforceability in the contractual agreement. This assignment discussed the essential element needed to form a valid contract under Malaysian law and explain how this element help ensure certainty, fairness, and enforceability in contractual relationship. In daily life, contracts play an important role in many areas such as business transaction, employment, buying and selling, and service. Therefore, contract law exists to protect the rights and responsibilities of the parties involved. For my parts of the presentation, I will focus on the introduction to contract law, the historical framework of contract law in Malaysia, and the essential element of the valid contract. This slide explains the historical framework of contract law in Malaysia. Contract law in Malaysia is heavily influenced by the English common law system, among the main influence of British contract law and the Indian Contract Act 1872. However, Malaysia practices a pluralistic legal system. This means that the Malaysian contract law system does not rely solely on common law but is also influenced by local laws, Sharia laws for Muslim, and local custom and practice. The main legislation governing contract law in Malaysia is the Contract Act 1950. This act provides important principles such as offer, acceptance, considerations, competency of parties, and remedies for breach of contracts. In conclusion, the Malaysian contract law system was developed through a combination of foreign influence and local legal needs to ensure justice and certainty in contractual relationship. Of the valid contract. This slide shows the essential element require a form a valid contract. The first element is proposal, offer or offer and acceptance. One party must make an offer and the other party must clearly accept the offer. The second element is free consent. The agreement must be made voluntary without coercion, fraud, or undue influence. The third element is lawful consideration. A contract must contain consideration that is lawful under the law. The fourth element is competency. The parties entering into the contract must have legal capacity, such as being a legal age and mentally sound. The final element is lawful object. The purpose of the contract must be legal and must not be against the law or public policy. When all these elements are fulfilled, the contract can be considered valid and enforceable in court. Diagnostic matrix, the status of an agreement. These slides explain the status of an agreement based on compliance with legal requirement. The first category is a valid agreement. This type of contract fulfills all the essential elements and is enforceable by law. The second category is a void agreement. This type of agreement has no legal effect from the beginning. For example, agreement involving illegal activities are considered void. The third category is a avoidable agreement. In this situation, one party has the right to cancel the contract due to factors such as coercion, misinterpretation, or fraud. Through these categories, we can understand that contract law not only determines whether an agreement exists, but also determines whether the agreement is valid, void, or voidable. In conclusion, contract law plays an important role in ensuring that agreements are made fairly, clearly, and are legally enforceable. Essential elements such as offer, acceptance, free consent, consideration, competency, and lawful object help create certainty in contractual relationship. That is all from my presentation. Now I give to the next presenter to continue. Thank you.
Hello, hi, my name is Tia Sofia, and today I will be explaining the concept of consensus in contract law, specifically focusing on offer and acceptance. This slide illustrates the mechanics of consensus between two parties. On the left side, as you can see, we have the proposer, which is the person making the offer. On the right side, we have the acceptor, which is the person receiving and accepting the offer. The key principle here is that acceptance must be unconditional. This means the acceptor must agree completely to the exact terms proposed by the offerer without making changes or adding new conditions. If changes are introduced, it may no longer be considered acceptance, but instead a counter-offer. Under Section 2A to Section 7, for a proposal to become a binding promise, acceptance must be absolute and unconditional. This ensures certainty and clarity in contractual agreements. Both parties must clearly understand and agree to the same terms before a contract can exist. This slide also highlights the concept of consensus ad idem, which means agreeing upon the exact same thing in the exact same sense. In simple terms, both parties must have the same understanding of the agreement. Without this mutual understanding, there is no true consensus and therefore no valid contract. Another important concept shown here is the objective test, established in the case of Keppel Prospecting Ltd v. Smith in 1964. Descartes stated that contracts are judged based on external behavior and expressed intentions, not hidden personal thoughts. This means Descartes will look at the parties said and did outwardly rather than what they secretly intended in their minds. For example, if one person clearly communicates acceptance through words or actions, the law may recognize a valid contract even if they later claim they did not truly mean internally. Therefore, the law prioritizes certainty and observable conduct to determine whether a valid agreement exists. Next, I will discuss the concept of free consent, which is one of the most important foundations in contract law. This slide uses the image of an arch to symbolize how contracts rely on free consent as the keystone holding the structure together. If free consent is weakened or damaged, the stability of the agreement is affected. The arrows above the keystone represent factors that can invalidate or weaken consent. This includes undue influence, coercion, fraud, misrepresentation, and also mistake. All of these factors interfere with a person's ability to make a free and genuine agreement. For example, coercion happens when a person is forced or threatened into agreeing. Fraud involves intentional deception, while misrepresentation occurs when a false statement leads another party into the contract. Undue influence happens when one party abuses a position of power or tries to pressure another person. Mistake refers to situations where parties enter the agreement based on incorrect assumptions. The structural note on the left explains that if the keystone is compromised, the arch does not collapse immediately. Instead, the contract becomes voidable under Section 19. A voidable contract means the agreement remains legally valid unless the injured party decides to cancel it. In other words, the affected party has the right to either continue with the contract or reject it because their consent was not freely given. This slide also mentions the 6 Windows cases as a case law spotlight. This case highlights the importance of judicial safeguards against exploitation, especially in situations involving unequal bargaining power. The court recognizes the vulnerable parties may be pressured into unfair agreements, particularly when one side has significantly more knowledge, influence, or power than the other. Therefore, the law intervenes to ensure fairness and to protect genuine consent in contractual relationships. Overall, this slide emphasizes that free consent is essential because contracts should reflect voluntarily and informed agreements between parties, not pressure, manipulation, or even deception. Moving on to the next slide, I will be talking about a special situation in contract law involving custom, marriage, and also minors. Under Section 11, minors generally do not have the legal capacity to enter contracts. Because of this, agreements made by minors are usually considered void ab initio, meaning they are void from the very beginning. However, this slide highlights an exception involving customary marriage arrangements. In some communities, customary marriages or betrothals involving minors are recognized as a part of cultural traditions. This creates a conflict between strict legal rules and also cultural practices. The case mentioned here is Rajaswari v. Balakrishnan from 1958. The court had to decide whether a customary marriage arrangement involving minors should automatically be considered void due to lack of contractual capacity. The court recognized that marriage is different from ordinary commercial contracts. Marriage carries social and cultural importance, so the court treated it as a special exception. The court also explained that the customary marriage ceremony itself does not create the contract. Instead, it acts more as a ratification or solemnization of promises already made earlier between the parties or family involved. This case shows that courts may sometimes balance strict statutory law with cultural realities and social customs. However, this exception is limited only to cases involving marriage and does not apply to ordinary business contracts made by minors. In conclusion, although minors generally cannot enter valid contracts under Section 11, courts may recognize exception in customary marriage cases because of their cultural and social significance. That will be all for my part. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Muhammad Iqbal. This slide explains the issue of digital ambiguity in modern contract law. First, under the framework section, Malaysia introduced the Electronic Commerce Act 2006 and the Digital Signature Act 1997 to support electronic transaction and online agreement. This law recognizes digital communication as legally valid. However, there is still a structural gap. Section 4 follows the postal rule, where acceptance becomes complete once the message is sent. In today's instance, digital communication, it's become difficult to determine the exact moment of dispatch and receipt. This creates legal uncertainty in online contracts. Lastly, there is an exclusion warning. Certain important documents, such as deeds, are excluded from digital frameworks to avoid fraud and manipulation. As a result, there is still a limitation in electronic attestation and authentication. Overall, this slide shows that although digital contract law exists, modern technology continues to challenge traditional legal principles. Next, this slide discusses the tension between civil law principle and Sharia principle in Islamic finance contracts. On the left side, the civil law pillar focuses on strict statutory requirements, guarantee obligation, and procedural enforcement. Civil court mainly emphasizes legal certainty and contractual execution. On the right side, the Sharia pillar emphasizes concepts such as redha, which means genuine concerns, together with fairness, ethics, and compliance supervised by Sharia supervisory boards. The main friction points occurs when civil court enforce Islamic finance contracts using conventional legal principles without fully considering the flexibility and ethical dimension of Sharia law. As a result, this creates a gap in legal pluralism, where two different legal approaches may conflict with one another. In conclusion, this slide highlights the challenge of balancing civil law enforcement with Sharia value in modern Islamic finance. And the last one, this slide explains the legal mechanisms used to overcome contractual gaps and unfair outcomes. The first concept is the doctrine of substantial performance. Under this doctrine, court may recognize partial but significant completion of contractual obligation. This prevents harsh consequences when one party has substantially fulfilled the contract, even if performance is not perfectly complete. The second concept is implicit terms. These are terms automatically inserted by law into contract, even if they are not expressly written. For example, under the Sale of Goods Act 1957, certain protections ensure fairness and commercial efficiency. This includes terms function as legal safety nets to protect parties and maintain fairness in commercial transactions. Overall, this slide demonstrates how court and statutes help fill legal gaps to ensure justice, fairness, and practical business effectiveness.
Hello everyone, my name is Farhana, and now that we understand how a contract is built, we must address the reality of what happens when a promise is broken. This is where the remedy matrix comes in. So, in Malaysian law, remedies are generally divided into two pillars, which are the legal remedies and equitable remedies. So, let's start with the legal remedies, which are statutory and primarily focused on money. The most common form is general damages under Section 74 of the Contract Act. Think of this as the law's way of balancing the scales. It compensates the injured party for predictable natural losses that occur because of the breach. We also have the liquidated damages under Section 75. This is a pre-agreed sum written into the contract itself. It saves everyone time because you don't have to prove the exact amount of your loss in court. So you simply enforce the amount both parties agreed upon earlier. However, sometimes money is not enough to fix the problem, so this is where equitable remedies, which are discretionary and action based, step in. One major tool is specific performance under the Specific Relief Act 1950. This is a court order forcing the parties to actually fulfill their promise, such as compelling the transfer of a unique piece of land. Then we also have injunctions, which are used to halt a breach or maintain the status quo. And finally, there is a consummary under Section 71, which ensures a fair payment for partial work already completed, preventing one party getting a free work at the expense of another. So, moving on to our next slide, we need to talk about the math of a legal battle, which is measuring the loss. Winning a case does not mean you get an unlimited payout. The court follows two very strict rules to keep things fair, which the first rule is from the case of Hadley and Baxendale. This rule dictates that damages must be reasonably foreseeable to both parties at the time they made the agreement. If a loss is too remote or totally unexpected, then the court will not make the other person pay for it, as we want to compensate for the breach and not punish the person for every single butterfly effect that follows. The second and perhaps most important part of my section uh, would be the duty to mitigate, famously highlighted in the case of Gabatasan Timber. As you can see on the mitigation value curve in the slide, a plaintiff cannot simply sit back and watch their losses pile up like a mounting debt. If you are the injured party, you have a legal duty to take reasonable steps to minimize your loss. And if you fail to mitigate, meaning you did not try to find a new supplier to fix the issue, then the court will label that extra financial hit as an irrecoverable loss. You then will only be awarded for the reasonable mitigation portion, and essentially the law helps those who help themselves. So, in summary, the goal of damages is not just to hand out money, it's to return the injured party to the position they would have been in had the contract been performed correctly. So, that's it for my part. Thank you.
Hi, good day everyone. I'm Lau Yuk Lian. My part focuses on what happens when a contract is breached and money alone cannot fix the situation. This is where equitable remedies come in under the Specific Relief Act 1950. The first remedy is specific performance. Under Section 11 of the Act, a court can order a party to actually carry out their contractual obligation rather than simply paying damages. This is most commonly used in land transaction. because land is unique and cannot simply be replaced with money. This was confirmed in City Investment Sdn Berhad and Koperasi Serbaguna Kupex Terbatas 1985, where the court granted specific performance because no monetary payment could substitute for the specific land in question. However, specific performance is not available for personal service contract for agreement requiring continuous court supervision. The second remedy is an injunction, a court order directing a party to stop breaching their contractual obligation in Pertama Cabaret Nightclub Sdn Berhad and Romantang 1981. The court granted an injunction to prevent a performer from appearing at the place while still contractually bound to the plaintiff. Under Section 40, where a party clearly intends to breach their obligation, the innocent party may pursue rescission, effectively unwinding the contract. If partial performance has already occurred, a claim for quantum merit under Section 71 allows fair compensation for work already done to prevent unjust enrichment. How do Malaysian court actually interpret contract in practice? Malaysian court take a balanced approach. They do not read a contract in a purely literal way, nor do they ignore the written words. Instead, they examine both the literal text of the contract and the commercial context surrounding it. Looking at negotiation, industry custom, and the party conduct, this approach is guided by Section 30 of the Contract Act 1950, which requires certainty, agreement to which uncertain meanings are void. So when ambiguity arises, court use contextual interpretation to give effect to what the party actually intended. In commercial agreement, courts also give primacy to what a reasonable business person would understand the contract to mean, ensuring that the law remains practical and commercially sensible. Bringing everything together, the fundamental elements of a contract offer acceptance, consideration, and free consent, create a theoretical premise, but it is only through a remedial framework, damages under Section 74, specific performance injunction, and quantum merit, that this promise becomes a practical and foreseeable obligation. The essential elements alone are not enough. Malaysia contract law derives its true strength from the combination of formation rules and remedial mechanism working together. While challenges remain in areas like electronic contracts and Sharia compliance, the overall framework continues to adapt, ensuring that whoever enter a voluntary obligation under Malaysian law will be held accountable to it. Okay, that's all for our group presentation. Thank you. Goodbye.